Every January, we're sold the same promise: new year, new you. And it sounds empowering until you really think about it. Because hidden inside that phrase is an assumption no one talks about: that who you are right now isn't enough, isn't capable, or isn't worth building from. So every year, millions of people try to abandon themselves, reinvent their identity, and start over from scratch again. And when that doesn't work, they don't blame the message, they blame themselves. But here's the truth: you don't fail because you couldn't become someone new. You struggle because growth doesn't work that way. Real change isn't a reset, it's a continuation. Look, habits don't reset on January 1st. Your nervous system doesn't reset. Your environment doesn't reset. And your identity definitely doesn't reset. So today, we're going to call the lie what it is, not tear you down, but to free you. This episode isn't about becoming a different person. It's about understanding what actually works when motivation fades, life stays real, and the consistency becomes the real challenge. If you've ever felt frustrated that starting over keeps leading you back to the same place, you're not broken. You've just been given the wrong blueprint. Let's fix that. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Here in part one, we're going to talk about why the new you sounds right, but it backfires. Here we go. The idea of new you doesn't come from nowhere. It appeals to something very human: the desire for relief. Relief from old habits, old patterns, old disappointments. When life feels heavy, the promise of a clean slate feels like hope. And that's why the phrase sticks. But here's the problem. When we label growth as becoming someone new, we quietly turn our current self into something that needs to be escaped. The message becomes, who I am now isn't good enough. I need to replace myself. That framing feels motivating at first. It's exciting. It's dramatic. It gives you a surge of energy. And then reality shows up. Because the version of you that wakes up on January 15th still has the same nervous system, and you're still in the same environment, and still have the same responsibilities and the same emotional patterns as the version of you on December 31st. And when those familiar changes resurface, the new you narratives collapse under its own weight. That's where most people start to disconnect. Not because they lack discipline, but because the identity they were chasing was never designed to survive real life. And here's the thing. When growth is framed as reinvention, the moment you start to struggle feels like proof that the experiment failed. So instead of adjusting, people abandon the process entirely. They assume something must be wrong with them. But friends, nothing is wrong with you. What backfires isn't your effort. It's the expectation. Real growth doesn't begin with rejecting who you are. It begins with understanding who you already are and what you're building from there. The truth is, sustainable change is quieter than what we're taught to expect. It doesn't announce itself with a dramatic before and after. It shows up in continuity, in the unglamorous decision to keep going as the same person, just slightly more aligned than yesterday. And when you stop trying to become someone new, you give yourself permission to become more honest, more consistent, and more real. And that's where change actually starts. All right, we're going to talk about how identity doesn't reset on January 1st here in part two. One of the quietest traps of the new year is the belief that time itself creates change. That when the calendar flips, something inside us is supposed to flip with it. But identity doesn't work on a schedule. You don't wake up on January 1st with a new nervous system. Your habits don't suddenly disappear. Your environment doesn't rearrange itself to support the goals you just declared. And yet, we expect ourselves to operate as if everything has changed simply because the date did. That expectation creates a dangerous disconnect, though. When your behavior doesn't match the new you imagined, the mind goes looking for a reason. And too often, it lands on self-judgment. Why am I already struggling? What's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong. You're just human, operating inside systems that didn't reset overnight. Identity is built through repetition, not intention. It forms slowly through patterns in your brain that recognizes as safe, familiar, and sustainable. When we ignore that reality and demand instant transformation, we end up fighting ourselves instead of working with ourselves. This is why so many goals feel heavy so quickly. They're not anchored to the life you're actually living. They're anchored to the version of you that only exists in theory. And when theory meets reality, reality always wins. What actually works, though, is continuity. Carrying who you are into the new year with awareness instead of rejection. Not asking yourself to become someone else, but by asking how the person you already are can take one step forward without breaking. Change that lasts doesn't come from dramatic declarations. It comes from small, repeated actions that teach your brain a new normal. That's how identity evolves. Quietly, gradually, and honestly. And when you stop expecting a reset, you stop feeling like you're already behind. You realize you're not late to anything. You're exactly where growth begins, inside the life you already have. And from there, progress becomes possible. And here's your first challenge. For the next 24 hours, stop using the word restart. If you catch yourself thinking, I'll start over tomorrow, replace it with, what's one small action I can carry forward right now? Then do that one thing, even if it feels almost too small to matter. And here's why it works. This restrains your brain to seek continuity instead of escape. You've got this. We're now going to talk about the hidden damage of starting over here in part 3, but I'm going to pause and share a personal experience with you. Year after year after year, and I'm being serious, after year, I had set out to become more fit. And around, let's call it the 15th or the 19th of January, I'd almost already be done. Maybe because I had to travel, or because it was a life thing happening and I had to pause, or maybe I got sick and, put the exercise on pause. But the problem was I never picked up the momentum. I never moved forward. And that made me sad because, like I said, every year I went through the same pattern and it caused damage because at one point I just didn't even set New Year's resolutions. I knew that I should set goals to be more fit, stay healthy, and so forth. But I'd already wired my brain that I was going to give up. And that's not just unhealthy. It's dangerous because we need to stay healthy. So I'm going to talk about that hidden damage in just a little bit more detail. So let's get to it. Starting over feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like the right thing to do when you miss a day or break a streak or fall out of rhythm. But there's a cost to that. And the thing is that nobody talks about it. Every time you start over, your brain quietly records the experience, not the intention, but the outcome. And the outcome it learns is this: I don't follow through. Even when the effort is genuine, the repetition of starting over teaches your nervous system to expect abandonment. That's how self-trust erodes, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, and without drama. The problem isn't that people quit once. It's that they've practiced quitting many times under the name of fresh starts. And over time, the identity shifts from I'm someone who sticks with things to someone who eventually resets. And that identity becomes self-fulfilling. This is why confidence doesn't come back just because motivation returns. Confidence is built when your actions prove to you that you can stay, even when things aren't perfect. Starting over interrupts that proof. It tells your system that discomfort is a reason to abandon the process rather than adapt to it. What most people call failure is actually a moment of misalignment. The plan didn't fit the day. The expectation didn't fit the reality. And instead of adjusting the plan, they threw away the entire identity they were trying to build. That was me, year after year after year. But growth doesn't require perfection. It requires continuity. And staying doesn't mean forcing yourself through something that no longer works. It means choosing to remain corrected to the intention, to the direction, and the version of you that's learning in real time. And when you stop restarting, you start repairing trust with yourself. And that trust becomes the foundation for consistency that actually lasts. That's not dramatic, but it's powerful. And when I found that for myself, things changed. And here's the last thing I want to share with you. It doesn't just happen once. It happens throughout our life on varying levels when it comes to goals, aspirations, and just trying to get ahead. So I encourage you to maybe even listen to this portion one more time or over again, because as we all know, repetition is what helps us move forward. You've got this. Here in part 4, we're going to talk about what actually works. Continuity over reinvention. If starting over keeps breaking your momentum, the answer isn't more motivation. It's a different model entirely. What actually works is continuity. Continuity doesn't sound exciting. It doesn't sell well. There's no dramatic transformation or clean before and after moment. But continuity is how real change survives contact with real life. Reinvention asks you to become someone else. Continuity asks you to stay connected to who you already are while it's moving forward. One approach creates pressure, the other creates stability. And when you prioritize continuity, the goal stops being perfection and starts becoming and being alignment. So instead of asking, am I doing this the right way? You begin asking, am I still connected to the direction I chose? That subtle shift changes everything. Continuity allows room for bad days. It allows adjustments without guilt. It recognizes that progress isn't linear and that slowing down isn't the same as stopping. Most importantly, it keeps your identity intact while it evolves. And that's so important. This is why small actions matter more than big declarations. A tiny, repeatable behavior performed consistently teaches your brain something powerful. I can be trusted. And over time, that trust compounds. You don't need to convince yourself to keep going. You just do, because it's who you're becoming. Reinvention relies on emotion. Continuity relies on structure. Emotion fades, structure remains. And here's the part most people miss. Continuity doesn't mean staying the same. It means changing in a way your system can actually absorb. Growth that overwhelms, it doesn't stick, but growth that integrates does. When you stop trying to become a new version of yourself and start committing to staying connected, you remove the pressure to perform. You trade intensity for consistency, and consistency is what reshapes identity over time. This is the shift that makes change sustainable. And here's your second challenge. For the next 7 days, pick one goal you're working on and ask yourself this question each morning. What is the smallest version of this that keeps me connected today? Not the ideal version, not the perfect version, not the impressive version. The honest, doable, real-life version. Then do only that, even if it feels almost too easy. No upgrading, no stacking, no restarting. Just continuity. And here's why this matters. This challenge trains your nervous system to associate progress with staying, not pushing. That's how identity begins to stabilize. One of the most common questions people ask at the beginning of change is this: who do I want to be? Here in part 5, we're going to talk about that. On the surface, it sounds powerful, visionary, forward thinking. But there's a problem with that question. It pulls you into fantasy before it anchors you in reality. When you focus only on who you want to be, it's easy to design goals around ideal conditions. More time, more energy, fewer responsibilities, better outcomes. The version of you in that picture is calm, disciplined, and uninterrupted. Life cooperates. Motivation stays high. And then real life shows up. So a better question, the one that actually leads to progress, is this. What can I sustain when life is normal? Not when things are perfect, not when motivation is high, but when your schedule is full, your energy is uneven, and your attention is split. That question changes the entire game. Sustainable growth isn't built around your best days. It's built around your most common ones. So when your goals fit into the life you actually live, they stop feeling fragile. And they stop breaking the moment pressure appears. This shift also removes a lot of quiet shame. So instead of constantly feeling like you're falling short of an ideal version of yourself, you start building confidence in the version of you that shows up consistently. You begin to trust your process because it's honest. The goal isn't to lower your standards, it's to anchor them. And standards that can't survive reality don't elevate you, they exhaust you. When you start designing habits, goals, and expectations around sustainability, something interesting happens. Momentum stops feeling forced. Progress becomes repeatable. And identity begins to form naturally without you trying to perform it. You don't need a better vision of who you could be. You need a clearer relationship with who you are right now and what that person can carry forward. That's how change stops being temporary and starts becoming real. Consistency is an identity practice, not a motivation trick. And we're going to talk about that here in part 6. Most people think consistency is something you find, like motivation. That if you could just tap into the right mindset, discipline would finally stick. But consistency doesn't work like that. Consistency isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice. And every time you practice it, you're teaching yourself who you are. This is where most advice goes wrong. It treats consistency like a tool for getting results, when in reality, it's a tool for shaping identity. You don't become consistent because you suddenly feel disciplined. You feel disciplined because you've practiced showing up, especially when you didn't feel like it. Every small action sends a signal to your nervous system. This is who you are now, not who you hope to be. Not who you perform on good days, who you are in real conditions. This is why motivation can't be the foundation. Motivation is emotional. Identity is structural. Motivation spikes and crashes, whereas identity stabilizes behavior even when emotion is low. When you rely on motivation, inconsistency feels personal, like a flaw. But when you understand consistency as practice, inconsistency becomes information. It shows you where expectations were unrealistic, where systems need adjusting, and where alignment can improve. And here's the quiet truth. Consistency doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be repeatable. The version of you that shows up imperfectly but regularly will always outperform the version that goes all in once and then disappears. Over time, consistency stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like self-respect. You no longer ask, do I feel like doing this? You ask, is this part of who I am? And when behavior is anchored to your identity, staying doesn't require force because it becomes natural. And here's your third challenge. Choose one small action you already do inconsistently. And for the next 5 days, do it at the same time each day, no matter how imperfectly. When you do it, say to yourself, this is who I'm becoming. That's it. No upgrades, no apologies, no pressure, just practice. You're not broken. You're fragmented. By the time people reach the point of wanting to start over, most of them aren't failing. They're fragmented, pulled in too many directions, living under expectations that don't fit the reality of their lives. Let's talk about that here in part 7. Fragmentation happens when different parts of you are trying to survive different demands at the same time. One part wants growth, another wants rest, another wants certainty, but none of them are wrong. But without alignment, they compete instead of cooperate. And that internal conflict is exhausting. This is why New Year, New You feels so heavy. It asks you to replace yourself instead of reunite yourself. It ignores the parts of you that are tired, overwhelmed, or cautious, and then labels them as obstacles to overcome. But those parts aren't the enemy. They're signals. Real growth begins when you stop trying to silence the parts of yourself and start listening to them. When you ask, what do I actually need in order to stay connected? Instead of, how do I force myself to change? Here's the thing. Fragmentation dissolves through integration, through honesty, through goals that respect your nervous system, your environment, and your season of life. This is how identity stabilizes, not by erasing who you are, but by bringing all of you into the same direction. You don't need a new version of yourself. You need coherence. When your actions, expectations, and identity align, consistency stops feeling like resistance. It starts feeling like relief, and you're no longer at war with yourself. You're working with yourself. And from that place, growth becomes sustainable. So if you've been feeling stuck, behind, or frustrated, take a breath. Nothing is wrong with you. You haven't failed. You haven't missed your moment. You're not broken. You're just ready to come back into alignment. And that's where real change begins. As we close the show, I want to leave you with this thought. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, it's this. You don't need a new version of yourself to move forward. You need continuity, honesty, and alignment with the life you're actually living. Change that lasts doesn't come from abandoning who you are. It comes from staying connected, especially when things get uncomfortable, unglamorous, or quiet. That's where identity stabilizes. That's where self-trust is rebuilt. This episode is part of a 3-part January series. And in the next one, we're going to go even deeper into what it looks like to stay, not just in your goals, but in your sense of self, especially when life doesn't slow down and motivation isn't available on demand. If this resonated with you, do me a favor. Like the episode, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been hard on themselves this month. If you want more grounded insight or promo reels between episodes, come find me on all my socials. I'm sharing reflections, clips, and tools there as well. Remember, you're not behind. You're becoming. Wherever you're listening from, thank you for choosing to be here. When this episode meets your real life this week, pause long enough to choose how you respond. Not perfectly, not loudly, just honestly. You don't need the whole path, just the next right move. Come back next Wednesday for the 3rd installment of this 3-part series. You've got this. I believe in you. Now go live it.